The holidays are here, and before you stress about who to shop for and what to buy, here's a hint. Give the gift of the Virginia Lottery. Adults of all ages love the excitement of holiday scratchers, and the online games are perfect for that holiday downtime. Don't overthink and overspend. Celebrate the holidays with the Virginia Lottery in stores, in-app, or online. And play the New Year's Millionaire Raffle for even more excitement this season. I give scratchers to my boss, and I give scratchers to my wife. I give Virginia Lottery holiday games to every adult in my life. I play the New Year's Millionaire Raffle and online games just for me. It's always a season of fun when you give and play the Virginia Lottery.
Welcome to this week's Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin and Bob Marks. The Harness Racing Alumni Show is the #1 harness racing podcast in North America. We have sponsorships and advertising spots available. For more information, email rrtrotten@outlook.com or visit ustrots.com. The statements and opinions of our guests are their personal opinions and beliefs, and it does not necessarily represent the opinions of the Harness Racing Alumni Show or of its host.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your hosts, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
Joining us on this week's show, we have a panel that includes journalist Gil Winston, journalist Bob Pandolfo, and our own Bob Marks. The panel will be discussing the Gural rule on the banning of stallions' offsprings from the Meadowlands-sponsored stake races like the Meadowlands Pace and so forth, which apply to stallions that physically are able to race as 4-year-olds but don't due to stud requirements. Gil, Bob, welcome back to the Harness Racing Alumni Show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, my first question is going to be over to Gil. Gil, is it good for the sport to have our top stallion 3-year-olds come back and race as 4-year-olds?
Well, that would be good, but the act of banning them just doesn't really seem fair. People have a right to run their own business. Of course, Mr. Gural is a private enterprise, so he can make the rules for his track any way he seems fit. So it's the mixed bag of course, we want to see the good horses coming back, but it doesn't seem good business practice.
Bob Pandolfo, the same question to you. Is it good for the sport to have our top stallion 3-year-olds come back and race as 4-year-olds?
Yes, it's good. It's great for the sport. This year in particular, 2024, this has been a really bad year as far as the early retirements. Basically, all the good trotters, the 3-year-old trotters, are retiring. I mean, the trotters that are going to be racing next year, the 4-year-old trotters and age trotters are going to be ordinary, a pretty ordinary group. I mean, there are probably horses in Europe that would be ranked like outside the top 20 that could come here and dominate. So, yeah, I mean, it's bad. I don't know if the Gural rule has worked that well. I mean, it's been marginally effective at times. By the way, I wanted to mention, too, that, Woodbine was following the rule, which is, it's actually called the Stallion Restriction Condition, the SRC. We know it as the Gural rule. But they did follow it for a couple of years, but for several years. But then they dropped it, I think, in 2022. So I think the Meadowlands is the only track, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're the only track that actually follows the rule.
I think so. Bob Marks, the same question to you. Is it good for the sport to have our top stallion 3-year-olds come back and race as 4-year-olds?
Theoretically, it would be great, but one of the biggest problems with that has always been the 3-year-olds, just at the end of the year, are battle-hardened. They're ready for almost anything. However, once you lay them off and you bring them back in March or whenever you would bring them back, it's almost like starting fresh. And at that point, the returning 4-year-olds may not quite be as battle-hardened as they were as a late 3-year-old. Consequently, they could be at somewhat of a disadvantage. We saw that twice in the last few years when Captain Treacherous and Father Patrick came back as 4. Captain Treacherous, as far as I remembered reading, I think he raced 7 times with 2 wins, 2 seconds, and a third, and he earned $175,371. He wasn't quite the Horse of the Year candidate that he was as a late 3-year-old. As for Father Patrick, he raced 5 times. He had 1 win, 2 seconds. He earned about $120,000. What is interesting is that both of them went on to exceptionally great stud careers. It had no bearing on their stallion career. However, they just didn't quite come back as early 4-year-olds.
Okay. Bob, finish, Bob.
We used to have a system called the old HTA series, in which which was exclusively for 4-year-olds. They would come back. It was a barnstorming. They'd go from track to track. They would come back as 4-year-olds, and they would race strictly with each other, as opposed to going after the aged horses. Once in a while, you'd get a Romeo Hanover, an Overtrick, or a Brett Hanover able to make that jump immediately. But for the most part, they needed until at least 5 or 6 starts into their 4-year-old season before they became competitive with the older horses.
Okay. Bob Pandolfo, if a horse comes back as a 4-year-old and has either a bad or great year, would that affect his value?
It does. I mean, some of these horses that didn't have good years, though, they still, got a good syndication deal. So, but naturally, what used to happen years ago, I wrote an article a few years ago, a column where I pointed out many, many great horses that didn't become great until after their 3-year-old season. And if these horses had retired, there would be probably, I think it was something like 20 of the greatest horses of all time. We would have never heard of them, literally. I mean, horses like What a Baron, and there's many of them. I mean, they literally would have been wiped off the face of the sport because nobody would have remembered them. And that's one of the problems with this, is that, not all horses are going to show their best up until as a 3-year-old. Some of these horses don't even race as a 2-year-old. And there are horses that are late bloomers. And actually, going back over the history of the sport, there's quite a few of them. And they can get syndicated as a 4 or 5-year-old for big money, especially after a 4-year-old season. So, I mean, you can look at it both ways. Naturally, these people that own the horses, they're not, they want to get the money as fast as they can. And, the big difference in the sport now, and this is the same thing in thoroughbred racing, is that the rich people years ago felt they had enough money. They raced horses for the sport. Now there's no such thing as enough money. If they have $10 million, they want $20 million.
Correct.
So
now, Gil, the same question to you. If a horse comes back as a 4-year-old and has a bad or great year, would that affect his value?
It should at first. That's for sure. I mean, it's the world is still, what have you done for me lately? And a champion 3-year-old comes back 4-year-old. Again, it depends on the buyer. Some people may say forget about it. We know how great the horse was. But yeah, like Bob said, I mean, I go way back, and to me, a horse's peak we used to consider it 5 years old. That was when the horse was reaching his peak. So needless to say, if they're leaving at 3, they're never going to reach 5. But the game has changed because of all the money in the 2-year-old races, and whatever it takes to win a 2-year-old is what is done now. But that's a little off topic, as I believe we're losing a lot of good horses who shouldn't even be racing, who might have been outstanding if they were allowed to skip their 2-year-old a year. But I think that's a lot of also the downfall of why we don't see a lot better horses at older ages. That they're just being raced too hard at 2, and after the 3-year-old season, if they make all their money, risking it just seems like a bad business decision to risk a 4-year-old career if your horse is raced hard as a 3-year-old and it seems a great horse. So, looking from the owner's perspective, it's tough to justify going ahead for a 4th year.
Okay. Bob Marks, same question to you. If a horse comes back as a 4-year-old and has a bad or great year, would that affect his value?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It won't affect his siring ability, but it can affect his value. Now, of course, like Captain Treacherous, I believe, was totally syndicated before he came back. But you'll find, and you'll also find, too, and I heard people mention, yeah, there's a lot of horses that we may never really have acknowledged because they weren't top 2 and 3-year-olds, like What a Baron is one, Overcall is another. There were many like that who became great with 4-Star Shark. They became great as 6-year-olds or 5-year-olds. But on the same token, I think the question there could be asked, how many of them went on to become great sires? That's the other part of the equation.
Okay. Gil, my next question to you. Who should make the decision as to when to retire a horse and why?
Well, it should be the owner. I understand the need for the older horses, but it just doesn't seem right that somebody should arbitrate, that you should that somebody should be making a business decision for you. Again, I understand Gural is a private business there, and he can make the rules for his track, but it just flies in the face of fairness. Of course, it's acceptable when a horse is injured that, of course, they can skip their season, but there are borderline cases. Maybe there's something about the horse's conformation where he's sound, but there is some concern. There were reasons beyond he just can't race for a horse to not race as a 4-year-old. To me, the whole thing starts from the big money being offered to 2-year-olds. To me, that's the number one villain. I would like to see a lot of that purse money that is being sent to 2-year-olds to be saved for 4-year-olds, and that would fix everything. And of course, the breeders will say you're out of your mind. We'll want the money up front. So, it's the money-making decisions but again, it's a business decision, and the owner who spent the money should have the last say. And that's unfortunate.
No, finish.
No, it's unfortunate, yeah, because we need the good horses as 4-year-olds, but the owner has to have the final decision. I mean, they spent all the money. You can't be taking that away from them.
Okay, Bob Marks, the same question. Who should make the decision as to when to retire a horse and why?
Very simple. The connections should make that decision. It should not be mandated by any other ruling. The connections should decide how long they want to race their horse. That's all.
Gil, my next question, right back to you again. Could a owner fake lameness as a 3-year-old to avoid this rule?
I'm sure they do. Sadly, we've seen some, as we've seen the trials recently, that certain veterinarians may be induced to go along. I think most of them are honorable people, but there are a few bad apples. So where do you find them? So of course, when we're talking this kind of money and the opinion of the owner of this kind of money, and again, I get back to he's not really lame, but I don't think he will perform as well as he did as a 3-year-old because, and that is, how do you say that's not true? He will not race as good as a 4-year-old because, and they can come up with some things.
Bob Pandolfo, the same question to you. Could an owner, to avoid this rule, fake lameness?
Yeah, well, they do it all the time in thoroughbred racing. I mean, that's pretty much common. I would probably half the horses that retire at 3-year-old or 2-year-old seasons, especially 3-year-olds in thoroughbreds, they just say, he's got a bad ankle or something. They make an excuse. That's like the most common thing, and it's usually fake. But one of the things I think that you could. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention too. Ron Burke has kind of said some things about this. He'd like to bring back the graduate division for older mares, the graduate races for older mares that used to have years ago. He said that would be a one, but again, it's a financial situation, though, because the thing is that Jeff Gural then has to put up the money because that's where they would race it, at the Meadowlands.
Okay. Bob Marks, same question to you. Could an owner fake lameness to avoid this rule?
Of course they could if they chose to. And I don't really know how you would stop it.
Okay. Bob Pandolfo, you hit on this just before. Should we offer more 4-year-old races to encourage people to race their 4-year-olds rather than hitting them with a rule?
Yeah, that would be the best thing for the sport, is to have a lot of money for 4-year-olds. And like I said, some sort of bonus system. Even these series. I used to have these great series during the winter at the Meadowlands where some of the best racing in the history of harness racing was actually during the winter, in the Meadowlands. I mean, that's when you had, these really, great older horses like Genghis Khan and, so many of them. And they were some of the most exciting races. So they had, really good series. And, but it was for older horses. And I don't know how you structure it, though. You probably have to cut back in 2-year-old racing, and the owners aren't going to like that.
Gil, the same question to you. Should we be offering 4-year-old better, high-purse 4-year-old races to encourage them to come back and race as 4-year-olds?
Yeah, Bob just said the key thing. You got to take some of the money from the 2-year-olds and move it up to 4-year-olds. And the breeders and the owners would balk at it, but that is the solution. Like he said, the graduate series would require the track to put up the money, but it was coming from the stakes, from the original, then you'd have the money there. And it's also interesting the way 2-year-olds have changed over the year. Again, way back when, there were very few, there were big money 2-year-old racing forever, but there weren't as many. And those of us who went to the track, if you wanted to see a 2-year-old race, you had to get there early because they raced before the races started. You weren't offended by the 2-year-old breakers on the betting card. I will also say 2-year-olds have changed over the years. I mean, I go back to the day somebody would have to put you in the funny farm if you ever considered betting a 2-year-old against older horses. But now they win. They beat them now. So the quality of 2-year-olds has changed. I remember years ago when I was at Pocono Downs, when Stanley Danza had a champion 2-year-old there, and he was racing against some older trotters, and I remember he went up 3-5 with all the earnings, and I threw him out with great confidence, and the older trotters easily handled them. That would not be true today. The game has changed, and 2-year-olds are a lot stronger. And even though the 2-year-olds, you see them, they still are unpredictable. You still have the breakers. They're a lot more consistent than they used to be. But I believe they don't generate the handle as all the other races, so it's just bad business practice to have more 2-year-old races than 4-year-old races. But, that's, try to convince a breeder or an owner to race for less money as a 2-year-old, and hopefully they're still racing when they're 4, where the money's going to be bigger. I don't know how you can convince them to make that happen.
Yeah. Bob Marks, same question to you. Should we be offering more purse money for the 4-year-olds that return?
Theoretically, yes. However, one of the things, as the other guys have mentioned, 2-year-olds are a lot different now. And they've been different for quite a few years, mainly because what we've done is by primarily using early speed horses as stallions and dams, we've accelerated the maturity factor. They simply mature earlier, and that's basically it. Yeah, it would be wonderful if we could have an HTA and/or graduate series or something like that to at least allow the 4-year-olds their place in the sun until they could at least have enough starts in them to be competitive with the older horses. But I don't see giving up 2-year-old money as far as the breeders are concerned. I don't think that's going to be very popular.
Okay, this is my last question. I'm going to start off with Gil again. Does it make a difference on the handle and the attendance to bring the 4-year-olds back?
I believe it does, but I'm not sure of the statistics. It makes sense to me. Again, it has changed because, as Bob Marks should say, the quality of 2-year-olds has changed. And I think more people bet on 2-year-olds now than they used to. I never really measured it. You know, I have the old school. When I see it, my gut feeling is, nobody bets on 2-year-olds anymore. But that's changed. They still make their breaks. I know personally I'm a little leery of getting in on them, but they are a lot more reliable than they used to be. And so I never really measured. It seems to me they bet less on 2-year-olds, but I wouldn't say for sure. That's more of an opinion than fact.
Bob Pandolfo, the same question. Does it make a difference on the attendance and handle to bring the 4-year-olds back, top stallion 4-year-olds back?
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference. When you have these older horses racing against each other, pacers and trotters, that's the best racing. I mean, the thing is no matter how you look at it, the older horses are better. So you're basically, by retiring them early, you're never getting a chance to see the best racing that we have. Because most of these horses will get better. Some of them won't, but most of them will. And then, of course, you'll have, other horses that will get a lot better. And you end up having races, of older horses that are like monsters, racing against each other like we did years ago, trotters and pacers. And that brings a lot of people to the track. I mean, you're coming out to see a field of, monsters race against each other, and it's a lot of fun, and it's exciting, and it gets a lot of betting handle, too.
Okay, Bob Marks, the same question. Does it make a difference on the attendance and handle to bring the top 3-year-olds back as 4-year-olds?
Personally, I have no idea that anything is going to make a difference as far as attendance and handle is concerned. I don't think there's anything we can do that's going to increase that very much. However, it certainly is exciting racing when the champions at 3 can come back at 4 and we can see them again and we can watch them as they further develop. I mean, look, a horse like Sweet Lou, he actually continued until he was 5, and I think his 5th year, was his all-time greatest year. And Sweet Lou is probably in fact, he's not probably, he is the number 1 pacing sire out there right now.
Yeah, and that's a very good example, Sweet Lou. There's many of them, though.
Okay, so I'm finished with questions, and I'm ready to close the show out. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to discuss on here that we might have missed? I take that as a no. So, so anyhow, I want to thank you guys, Bob Pandolfo and Gil, for joining us today.
Happy holidays, everyone.
That's a wrap for this week's show. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show.